boy, really an honor to be surrounded by these two gentlemen. And I think we're going to jump right into it. We have about an hour, a little over an hour for this session. And we do want to be sure to get to some give and take. So we thought it would be meaningful, actually, to begin by hearing a little bit from each of you about your own upbringing and religious education, Jewish education. So shall we start with our guest, Avraham? Would you be willing to open up by sharing a little bit about your own Jewish upbringing and education?
Shalom. I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was born to a very, very Jewish home. At least that's what I thought. The first language I ever wanted to learn in my life was the Hebrew language. And why? Because my parents used to tell each other secrets in Hebrew so that we, the kids, would not understand. If I remember the sounds with which I grew up at home, I remember my parents cursing Hitler for what he had done to the Jews. I remember them cursing Stalin for what he was doing to the Jews. I remember them getting very excited. Soon there's going to be a Jewish state. And isn't it wonderful? There is a Jewish state. I had a very strong Jewish identity. I knew I was part of the people of Israel. I was very much influenced by growing up in South Africa, because everyone in South Africa was a member of a tribe. Whether you were black or white, there were tens of black tribes, and there were 4 major white tribes: the Englishman, the Afrikaner, the Litvak, and the Galiciana. I happened to grow up in a Galiciana family. My father was born as a Chassid in novice, a Sanse Chassid in Sans. At the age of 15, they moved to Vienna. He gave up his traditional practices, moved into Zionism with all the fervor of a Chassid, and was one of the 8 founders of Hashomer HaTzair, the Zionist socialist movement. Those 8 people sent themselves each to a different country. He was sent to Bulgaria. He tried to create a school, couldn't find anybody who could teach Hebrew. Came to Israel. My mother, who'd only been in Israel for 3 years, had just graduated during those 3 years of teacher ceremony. She was among the 8 teachers he took back. And so I was born into a very Jewish family where Hebrew was an essential part of our life. Just a word about Shabbat. My father was an atheist, and a proclaimed atheist. But he always used to say, I'm an atheist, Baruch Hashem, because of course he can't talk any differently. We had a very interesting Shabbat. Friday night, my father used to say Kiddush, and when I asked him why, he said, because the Kiddush is the one prayer which at the same time teaches you universalism and particularism. You say, Zecher lebriat ha'olam, remember that you are part of creation, you're just like everyone else who was created, every other human being, but it also talks about the story of exile from Egypt, which is our particular story. But Shabbat afternoon was very interesting. I had to be home for lunch on Shabbat afternoon, and right after lunch, my father, from the age of 5, when I was 5, not him, but when I was 5, he used to take down a Gemara and study Gemara with me for an hour and a half every Shabbat without his head covered and with a cigarette in his mouth. Right after that, we used to move into the living room, and he used to sit at the one end of the couch, used to make me lie down on the couch with my head on his lap, and he used to put an opera on the Vitrola, what is it called, a gramophone? And he used to say to me, close your eyes, and I will tell you exactly what's happening on the stage while the music is playing and the sing is being sung. So I grew up with two great loves of Talmud and opera that I still live with today. These are things that created the memories of whom I am. I went to Israel. I was the first pupil in the first Jewish day school in South Africa. My mother was the headmistress. I assume my father was chairman of the board. I was the only kid in the school.
I see Arnie and Walt laughing.
And at the end of 10th grade, at the end of first grade, there were 10 of us. I was invited back to the school last year to address the school. There were 2,000 kids in the high school alone. It all began because I turned 6. I moved to Israel. I graduated high school. My father came to me one morning and said, Avraham, goodbye. I said, Dad, where are you going? He said, I'm not, you are. I said, where am I going? He said, you're a Jewish youngster. There's a Jewish state. Bye. The rest is history.
Thank you. All right, will you share, and also, solve the puzzle for us of where you both met
Indeed,
61 years ago?
Yes. So what we have in common is atheist fathers, except that mine was a second-generation atheist, so he no longer knew how to say Baruch Hashem about it. His parents had moved from the shtetl to Lodz sometime in the 1890s. When they got to the big city, they lost their Hasidic Yiddishkeit and became socialists. Most of my parents, my grandparents' siblings were Communist Party. They weren't, but they shared the communist view of religion. When I decided to go to rabbinical school, Grandma Green, Dad's mother, wrote me a letter. I still have. It's written in one sentence in what we call night school English, and it reads like this. Dear Arthur, I hear you still want to be a rabbi. I would be prouder of you if you would be a teacher and teach people things that are true. Because if there was a God in the sky, he would be shot down by Sputnik already, period. So that was my father's side. Though the great-grandparents had been Hasidim, of course. And those great-grandparents came to America. I remember one of them died when I was 3 or 4. My mother's side were traditional Jews, not Orthodox, but old world traditional. Grandpa's tarot shop was open on Shabbos, but upstairs from the tarot shop it was Shabbos. And Grandma lit candles and didn't write and didn't sew, and you couldn't ask for bacon and tomato sandwiches in Grandma's house. And it was a traditional Jewish world. When I was 8 years old, my father said to me, you have to do this terrible thing for your grandmother called going to Hebrew school, but if you hate it, you can quit. And I fell in love with it almost immediately. I'm one of the rare success stories of the afternoon Hebrew schools. Temple B'nai Abraham in Newark, New Jersey. It was an Ivrit B'Ivrit kind of school from the time I was 8 years old. And by the time I was 10, we had pen pals in Israel. And everything was talked about and taught in Hebrew. And when I was 13 or 12, my teacher convinced my father, sort of twisted his arm, and got me to Ramah for the summer. And I spent 3 summers in the Ramah camps when I was a teenager. The summers I was 15 and 16 in Ramah Poconos, my teachers were Yosef Yerushalmi and Gershon Cohen. There was a camp librarian, a kind of nothing position, I guess, but the man was called camp librarian. Because I came from Newark and not Philadelphia, I wasn't a day school kid, I'd never opened a Gemara. My Hebrew was pretty good. I was studying with the day school kids, but I'd never opened a Talmud. The camp librarian says, I'll show you how to study Talmud. His name was David Wesalivni. And so that was sort of the world I grew up in. My father was horrified by all this. I became increasingly excited about Judaism, about Hebrew, from the time I was 10 or 11 years old, and it was beginning to become observant when I was an adolescent. There were constant fights. I would say my father and I fought all our adolescent father-son battles on the battlefield of religion. So I would come home from camp. He would see me being notel yadayim, washing my hands. What's this? What's all this washing all of a sudden? Even though the house was completely treif, because that I couldn't change. So it was a tough haul, but I learned a lot. When I was 16, I read my first Hebrew book other than Sifrei Limud. It was Bilvav Yamim of Agnon. And I fell in love with this sort of romantic Zionist vision. I too could have taken out a kerchief and sailed across the sea to Eretz Yisrael. It was a very strong romantic Zionism. I like to say that I was an American Jewish kid who was exactly the right age to gain maximum benefit from all the great teachers whom Hitler cast up on these shores. The rabbi at that temple in Newark, New Jersey was Joachim Prinz from Berlin, a great labor Zionist orator and so on. When I became too frum for Prinz, I went to his brother-in-law, Max Gruenwald, who'd been the rabbi in Mannheim, by then was in Millburn, New Jersey. When I was 16, I went off to Brandeis, and there I studied with Nachum Glatzer, who had been Franz Rosenzweig's disciple in Frankfurt, with Alexander Altman, who was later my doctoral advisor from Berlin, famous rabbi and scholar from Berlin. I then went to JTS and had the privilege of studying privately for 4 years with Abraham Joshua Heschel. So these were all people, that was the generation that had come as immigrants either just before or just after the war, and I was an American Jewish kid whom they enjoyed teaching because I was serious and loved what they had to say. And I've seen myself in some ways as a conveyor of their message to later generations that didn't have the privilege and opportunity to know people from that world.
Art, you read my entire library personally. You met them personally.
Yeah,
They were your teachers.
Yeah, they were my teachers. They were very much my teachers, and that's a great blessing that I had, great privilege that I had, and I was in the right place at the right time and took it all seriously. Just a word or two more about background. So yes, when I graduated Brandeis in 1961, I decided to go off to Israel for a year. I had by that time been through an Orthodox phase and out of it. I had for 2 years decided, I'm a secular Jew. And I took on both Zionism and Yiddishism as forms of secular Judaism. I used to go to the Yiddish Kulturklub lectures in Boston and bring down the average age by 60 years. My Yiddish was pretty good. And I also was head of the Student Zionist organization in town here. And after 2 years, I said, no, that's really not what I want. I realized I am a religious person after all. I don't accept any of the answers I had given myself, but my questions are still religious questions. I'm in this Jewish thing for the meaning of life, not for Jewish cultural identity. And so I began to study Kabbalah and Chassidut. Altman taught the first course on Kabbalah ever taught in the American University in 1960, and I was in that class. Either he or Zalman Schachter, whom I'd already met, gave me an essay when I was 20 years old, a senior in college, by Hillel Zeitlin called Yesodot HaChassidut, the Fundaments of Hasidism. And I read that essay and I said, this is it. This will be my religious language for the rest of my life. I promised to translate that essay into English, which I only did 50 years later. But I was convinced, and I graduated college, and I went off to study with Gershom Scholem for a year, and that's when we met.
On the boat.
On the boat. We both took the Olympia, the Greek line boat, from New York to Tel Aviv, from New York to Haifa in 1961. Do you remember Yoshua Arieli was on the boat? Professor Arieli, he was wonderful to talk to, and some of the other young people on the boat, interesting group of people. But I immediately noticed Avraham. We noticed each other, I guess, and had some serious conversations, and have barely seen each other since then. I think we may have met once since then. So this is really Tchiat HaMeitim. This is really sort of going back to ancient history in our lives, and it's great to be here with you.
What is interesting, we both studied that same year, 61, which was a year after I studied with you, Leah, in 1960. I was going back to Israel. In 61, we both studied Jewish studies, and we took not a single course together.
Right.
We met socially, but we had no courses together because his interests in the Jewish world were very different from mine. Mm-hmm. His teachers were people who I came to much, much later out of an interest. Agnon was an integral part of my childhood, but all the others were all people that I came to get to know much later. My Jewishness and my Zionism and my search was not for an answer of the meaning of life, but how to ensure the continued significant survival of the Jewish people. I didn't study philosophy. I studied law. I studied what my father would call Jewish memory. And I just wanted to save the Jewish people. The meaning of life never really bothered me.
Well, I want to pick up on both of those comments, what you've just said and what you said, Art, before, that you were really drawn to the question of the meaning of existence, and that it was not just or not primarily about sort of the perpetuation of cultural identity. I'm thinking about both of those comments, and at the same time thinking about your biographies and how deeply both of you were steeped in the experience of Jewish peoplehood, for lack of a better word. And so I guess part of what I want to move us into is both how your own thoughts about the place of peoplehood in Jewish life and in Jewish education has evolved for each of you, and also how you've seen it change as you look generationally at sort of where we are in the Jewish world with that. So I don't know if either one of you.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Avraham, yeah.
I never moved to Israel to become an Israeli.
Sorry, say it again. I didn't hear
I
it.
never moved to Israel to become an Israeli. I moved to Israel because I was a member of the Jewish people. And by the way, I'm an Israeli today only because I'm a member of the Jewish people. I have no other reason in the world to live there. I can't stand the weather. I almost equally despise the politicians. I don't like, I mean, it's not, I love Israel because it's me, it's mine, it's ours, it's the echoes that I hear are of my people. I'm an Israeli only because I'm a member of the Jewish people. And so the Jewish people became very significant and important to me. My entire family in Israel lived on 2 kibbutzim. Half of them lived in a kibbutz called Kibbutz Lahav in the south, the other half in Kibbutz Mizra in the north. Either the place where they raised pigs or where they slaughtered pigs. My entire family in Israel was in the pig business. And my first day in Israel was the first time I ever met a real live walking pig. There must have been a major battle at the airport about where I'm going to spend my first day in a Jewish state. Remember, my father said, "You're a Jewish youngster, there's a Jewish state, bye." That's why I went. My first day in the Jewish state was the first time I ever met a real live walking pig.
There's an Amichai poem here somewhere.
And I'm in total surprise. I'm in total shock.
Avraham, I have to interrupt and tell you a story from that year. In that year, I was not observant in those days either. My friend Herman Shapiro, Chaim Shapira, who later was a writer for the Jerusalem Post, and
Yes.
I would go to a restaurant in Jerusalem, which was called by everybody Hadodot Beratzon. Hadodot Beratzon. There was these 2 old German Jewish ladies, Frau Meyer and Frau Steinthal. I remember the names. We later found out they were a lesbian couple for many years. And you would go there, and they spoke this very German Hebrew. Adoni rotze tosefet, Adoni rotze, and they had served something called basar lavan, and would whisper, Adoni basar lavan ze chazir. They would whisper it to you, but that's a long time.
I turned to my Israeli cousin who was taking me around the kibbutz when I saw these pigs, and I expressed my total and absolute surprise. And my cousin turned around to me and said to me, "Avraham, it was so important for you to be Jewish in South Africa, but now you've come to Israel, you can stop being Jewish." And that was an absolute shocker to me. I came to Israel because I was Jewish and because I wanted to continue to be Jewish. And I was told by my Israeli cousin, now you can stop being Jewish, you can become an Israeli. That triggered off in me an attempt to define for myself, what do I mean when I say I'm Jewish? And it took the rest of that year or even more until I began. By the time I met you, I was already Shomer Mitzvot. And I'd already become very, very traditional. And it came out of my seeking for an answer, what do I mean when I say I'm a Jew? And I simply wanted to make myself as Jewish as possible. And this was a part of the Jewish world I hadn't encountered, or I'd hardly encountered. And it opened the doors for me to the world of religion. With my father, studying Talmud was decidedly not a religious act. It was a very, very Jewish act.
Yeah, the course of events for me was somewhat different. As I say, I got to Israel that year in 1960, and I was not observant, but I was making lots of Jewish discovery. In addition to studying with Sholem and Rivka Schatz Zohar, I had to make a living. So to make a living, I got a job teaching high school English at a Tichon Erev that was run by something called Noar Oved Dati. And my kids, my 10th, 11th, and 12th graders were all either themselves immigrants from or just the children of recent immigrants from Iraq, Kurdistan, Persia, Afghanistan. Fascinating, fascinating world, because for me, Jewish had always been East European, had always been Yiddish. And suddenly I was exposed to a whole new world of Jewish life, and that was very exciting and very important for me. When I decided to go to rabbinical school in the course of that year, I was not yet really observant. And I had to decide whether I was going to go to JTS, the Rabbinical School of Conservative Movement, where you had to sign a pledge saying you would keep Shabbat, Kashrut, and daily prayers, or go to HUC, the Reform Rabbinical School. And I felt I really couldn't go to JTS because I couldn't sign that pledge. And I wrote back to this country to two rabbis whom I respected greatly, Stephen Schwarzschild and Joe Lukinski. Names will be known to some people here. And they both said to me, you must go to JTS, and it's a mitzvah to lie on the pledge. And Lukinski said, besides, if you go to HUC, I'll kick your teeth in. And he was a pretty tough guy. But by the time I got to JTS, I was already on the way back to greater observance, and their prediction was right that I would find my way back. Though over a very long, slow period, I was ambivalent about observance for a long time. In some ways, because I'd been wounded by what I would call obsessive religion when I was a teenager. And so coming back to consistent observance took me a very long time, probably really until I was 70. That's a long adolescence, but I'm now a post-adolescent, and so I've become a comfortably pretty observant Jew. It's what my students need me to be and what the world needs me to be, and I'm comfortable with it and happy with it, and that's why I do it. But it also is somehow spiritually fulfilling as well. So I began to study Kabbalah and Chassidut. I wrote a book on Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav, which was my dissertation. In Israel, it became a bestseller for many years, Bala Yisurim. And I got a job teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, teaching Jewish studies. But then I began to look around. I'm skipping over the Chavurah years, it's too much to tell. Then I began to look around at my students at Penn. And they were all 4th and 5th generation American Jews already. I'm the Jew I am because of my mother's parents. My sister, who never had a day of Jewish education in her life, because girls didn't have to go to Hebrew school because it didn't have to be a bar mitzvah for the girls, so to speak. Bat mitzvah was a word not even known. So girls didn't have to have Jewish education. But my sister has the same memories. Sunday before Pesach, we all went to Grandma's house and brought the Pesach dishes down from the 3rd floor. And the oldest cousin got to carry the biggest platter and so on. And my sister, I laugh at her, my sister's a Buddhist, but she can still say Pesach Deke perfectly because she has those memories. But I had been through a pretty intensive religious period, and so it took me a long time to come back to it. Yes, so teaching at Penn, I look at these students, 4th, 5th generation American Jews, they don't know what a Yiddish accent is supposed to sound like anymore. They don't have East European grandparents. If their grandparents have Jewish memories, it's of living in Baltimore or Philadelphia. And it's pickles from the barrel, not going to shul and not learning Gemara, and not the old Beit Midrash. That was in some ways all over for them and all over for that generation. And And so I began to ask, why should they be Jewish? What's going to keep them Jewish? And I began to feel that it was too much of a luxury to spend my time writing books about Judaism of the past when we didn't know if there would be a Jewish future in America. We didn't know where these kids were going. So I started to write theology. I started to write emunot v'deot, things that I believed in and things that I thought would speak to people and would affect people's lives. And in those days I published a book called Keter, The Crown of God in Ancient Judaism, in early Jewish mysticism, I think. And they sold about 1,000 copies, Princeton University Press, which meant about 800 to libraries and 200 to people. And it got 2 reviews. One liked it, one didn't like it, and that was an academic book. And then I wrote a book called Seek My Face, which was based on a series of lectures at a synagogue about personal spiritual journey, and people began to say, your book changed my life. It was one of the most important things I ever read. And I said, Boker Tov, you should write books that affect people, that people want to read. This, for a scholar, this is a major calamity, you understand, to write books that people want to read. And so then I left the university and went to be dean and then president of a small rabbinical school. I was there for a number of years. Sharon was one of my dearest students. And then I left there and went to Brandeis, where I inherited my own professor's chair. But after 10 years there, I again left to create this rabbinical school. My wife used to say, Allah Shalom, used to say, some people when they turn a certain age get a little red sports car every few years. Green gets a little red rabbinical school. But it means, now, I said, my comment was, yes, red refers mostly to the color ink in the ledger books of those rabbinical schools. But that's the point. I want to teach Judaism in the context of Jewish continuity. I want to teach Judaism because it's something vital to me, not because it's just academically interesting. In the university, you had to play the game of being completely objective and completely detached from your material and comparative perspectives always and so on. And I wanted to teach in a Jewish institution where people were talking about, well, how do we make this speak to the next generation? How do we make it alive? How do we make it vital to people's lives again? For me, that's what comes first. I care a great deal about the Jewish people and Jewish survival, but that's because we have a message, because we have something to say to the world. That until a decade ago, on the census form, they would ask you ethnicity, and it would say African American, Latino American, Pacific Islander, Asian American, 1 or 2 other choices, or other, parentheses, Caucasian. In other words, if you were Caucasian, if you were other Caucasian, the census couldn't give a damn if you were Armenian American or Jewish American or Italian American or Irish American. That stuff that's your past. More or less, forget it. You're an American now. Once we Jews were very belatedly accepted as white in America, and that took a long time. It took till the 60s. It took the Holocaust to do that in some ways. The implication in America was, yes, this ethnic identity stuff is not very important. Italians should eat bagels, Jews should eat pizza, they should both meet at the Chinese restaurant. It's everybody knows what meshuggah means, and everybody knows what paisan means, and that's about as much of those foreign languages as you really need to remember in America, and get over it.
Or do we really disagree?
No, I'm not saying that's the way it should be. I'm saying that I'm being descriptive, not prescriptive. I think that's the way things are in this country, and it's hard to, it's a hard sell to say you will remain part of the Jewish people because there is a Jewish people. No. I think we need more than that.
First of all, I agree that we need more than that, and I believe that we have more than that, and we have a purpose in life.
Good.
And when I talk about to ensure the significant renaissance of the Jewish people, there's a message to this Jewish people.
Good.
And I want this message to be represented. And everything I teach is around a message of making this a better world, a message of recognizing the relationships between universal ends and particular means towards those ends. Those are the things that I think, but Jews do not talk in the singular. I go to synagogue on Yom Kippur. I go every day, but I also go on Yom Kippur, which, by the way, is a surprise because my father didn't go to shul on Yom Kippur. And I remember I had a very pretty girlfriend who did go to shul on Yom Kippur, so I wanted to go. I was a terrible student in school. My father said to me, "You want to go to shul? Bring me your report card from school." I bring him my report card. My father takes out a lighter, burns the report card, which was a terrible report card. And he said to me, "Avraham, from tomorrow morning, you start again." That's the whole message of Yom Kippur. Your past does not have to determine your future. You can change, you can do better. That's what the message is. I loved my father being able to take the complexity of an idea of fasting and bring it down to the ground. My father forbade the use of Yiddish in our home. We have people come from Israel to raise money, and they used to meet. They couldn't speak English. They tried to speak Yiddish. My father said, "You speak Hebrew, I'll translate. Yiddish will not be spoken in my home." My granddaughter just graduated in Yiddish from the Hebrew University. My father must be turning over in his grave.
We have to rebel somehow.
But there is something about Yom Kippur that I think is important. There's a prayer that we say 5 times on Yom Kippur. It's called the Al-Chet. It's a long list of sins. We beat our chest as we read each of these sins. And I'm a very passionate person, as you can hear. I beat my chest with an intensity that prevents me from touching my chest for the next 6 months. But I want to assure you that at least half of those things on that list I've never done. I've never done them. So why in the world am I beating my chest? Leah, I don't know why I never did them. Maybe I never had the opportunity, but I never did them. So why am I beating my chest? Because we don't pray Al Chet Shechatati, we pray Al Chet Shechatanu. Jews live in the plural, not in the singular. It's not a search for personal fulfillment. It's a search for the fulfillment of this people achieving its goals in this world. And I can't achieve collective goals without the Jewish people. I arrive in America as a shaliach to the Jewish community of Baltimore, Maryland. On my way driving to Baltimore, Maryland, I pass a sign on the New Jersey Turnpike which said, "Families who pray together stay together." This sign is sponsored by the Council of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. And I almost had an accident. I could not understand what Jews were doing on the signpost. I know that Jews are not a religion. I know it's not a religion because my father told me so. And even though I lived a practicing Jewish life, it was a Jewish life, not a religious life. And I traveled all the way down to Baltimore, and I laughed my whole way about these crazy Jews who think it's a religion. I arrived at the home they'd rented for me. There was a sign on the door which said that night there's an opportunity, there's a party to welcome this guy from Israel. Seeing that I was the guy from Israel, I thought I should go to the party. I walk in, I said, "Who's the boss?" They point out a gentleman, his name was Bob. He afterwards became the head of the Council of Jewish Federations, Bob Hiller. They said, "He's the director of the Jewish Federation, he's the boss." I went to Bob, I said, "Bob, fix that sign." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Judaism's not a religion." He said, "It is." I said, "It's not." He said, "It is." I said, "Bob, how do you know it is?" He said, "My father told me so." We learned about being Jewish from two different fathers. But I had a very serious problem with this. I was sent by a Jewish state to a Jewish community to strengthen their sense of Jewish identity and their relationship to the Jewish state, and they're stuck thinking that Judaism is a religion. What am I going to talk to them about? I can live with the fact that the Jews have a religion, but we are not a religion. We are a people that has a transcendentally related culture that demands things of us that have got nothing to do only with us. It demands of us to change the world. But us, not me. I need you, Sharon, in order to do that. And I need you, Art, in order to do that.
Sounds like a religion to me. We've got a task to change the world, and we've got to do it together. And that is somehow a sacred task. And you have one of your 5 legs, after all, is Har Sinai.
Correct.
And that sounds a lot like a religion to me. It's a national religion or a collective religion, yes. But once you say there is a greater purpose to Jewish existence than just the perpetuation of Jews for other generations, then it seems to me you are saying there's some kind of religious message that Tikkun Olam, you said there's some kind of religious message that this Jewish existence is for the purpose of.
There's a purpose to the perpetuation of the Jewish people so they can fulfill their message to the world eternally.
That's okay. That's okay.
That's what it's all about.
That's fine.
It's not, my mother was my Hebrew teacher in school. My father, every Friday, used to take my school books and check what's going on. He looks at my Hebrew thing, and he sees my mother taught me past, present, and future in grammar, in Dikduk. He said, who taught you this nonsense? I said, your wife. He said to me, there is no such thing as present tense in Hebrew. There is no way in which you can say, I talk, I walk, I swim in Hebrew. All you can say is, I am talking, I am swimming, I am walking. It is a moving presence whose purpose is the connection of the past to the future so that we can fulfill what the Jewish people were meant to do.
Can I ask you a question? Because
Our grammarian would say there's no such thing as past or future either in Hebrew, but that's another story.
No, there's a Kodem and Kadima, which is the same root.
Well, I think one way we're slicing the differences between you is around this language of religion and people. But I'm also hearing something else which is related but distinct in what you're saying, Avraham, which is the I and the we, and the importance of the we in Jewish life, and of young Jews and old Jews developing the capacity to say we Jews and understand what they mean by that. I want to ask you, Art, to reflect a little bit on how you think about the relationship between the I and the we in people's Jewish lives.
It's a terribly important question, and it's maybe the most interesting thing we can talk about here today. So I'm really glad you push it. I very much am a we person when it comes to Jews, and that is vertical as well as horizontal. I'm very much a person conscious of where I come from in the past. My grandparents' legacy and their parents' legacy, and the sense that I'm a person who lives between generations, and I have a legacy that I got from East European grandparents to pass down to my very American grandchildren. And a sense that, yes, I want to pass down that legacy, and that's terribly important, and I'm very much a part of that we. But I also know that the legacy can't be passed down the same way my grandfather passed it down to me. My Zayda came from a place where there were two kinds of people, Yidden and Goyim. Yidden spoke Yiddish and Goyim spoke Goyish, and Jews hated Goyim as much as Goyim hated Jews. And my granddaughter goes to a public school in Needham, Massachusetts, where parents picking up their kids in the afternoon are speaking 17 different languages. And I'm happy about that. I'm happy about that. So That's part of my we. I also have a strong sense of we with Jews across the world and Jews across the various denominational lines. I've always been an anti-denominationalist in Jewish life. I was raised in the conservative movement, but not of it. I resigned from the Rabbinical Assembly many, many years ago because I didn't want to be a denomination supporter. I was with the Reconstructionists for years and was not happy with that label. I now daven sometimes in the egalitarian minyan meets here and sometimes in a Chabad minyan, and I'm pretty comfortable in both. And so I'm very much a Jew who sort of transcends the lines. I spent a lot of time in Israel. Last year I spent 3 months in the winter there, and I'm going back for 3 months again this year, and my Hebrew is fluent, and I love speaking publicly in Israel and so on. So I'm very much a part of that we. But when I try to sell it to American Jews, when I try to talk to American Jews about that, because of what I said, because of the situation in this country, because this country is very much one focused on your fulfillment and your individual, you're finding the meaning of your life and your spiritual journey, the we is not something that automatically is accepted or understood by American Jews. Forming the we, and I think we should form the we, forming the we will come about because a bunch of us find it meaningful in terms of our own quest in our own lives to create that we and build together. Israel was much more a we society, building the country, than America was, of course, but I see Israel changing too. I see a tremendous amount of new interest in personal spiritual journey, whether it's people returning from the trip to India, or whether it's Israelis who've given, I meet Dati Israelis who have given up on Rav Kook and are looking at Soloveitchik and Heschel and even Green and all kinds of other things, which are more about personal spiritual journey. I see that Israel is changing that way too. And I love the we. I feel myself part of the we. But if I ask what I can convince people of, what meaning I give people, what paths to meaning I give people, much of it has to do with personal quest, and then personal quest that has to be shared in community. I'm a Chavurah Jew. I created Chavurat Shalom, the beginning of the Chavurah movement, because I believe in intimate community and what intimate community can do to support people's individual Jewish journeys. A family can't do it alone. They need others to build a Chavurah with, to build community with. I like to think of Jewish life as a series of concentric circles. You have a Chavurah, you have an extended family, you have a Chavurah that becomes a surrogate extended family for many people in this country, because our extended families are so scattered, they live all over the world. And because they're so different in terms of Jewishness, one third cousin and I are the only Shomrei Shabbat, let's say, in my extended family. The grandchildren of most of my first cousins will not be Jewish. I see assimilation happening al-Basari, assimilation as we move further and further away from the immigrant experience. Assimilation is happening in America. It's inevitable. We will survive as a smaller people in America because of the unstoppable process of assimilation. The question is how small we will be and what kind of meaningful Jewish life that somewhat reduced in size Jewish community will find. I find lots of pockets of real energy and curiosity and desire to learn and even spirituality in the community, but I think it will be a smaller community than we once had, and I don't think there's any changing that. So providing for people the language of personal quest, building community. Your Chavurah is then part of a synagogue community and part of a broader local Jewish community, part of the Jewish people. Yes, all those concentric circles are important, and I think I want people in the inner circle to meet others from the outer circle. Yesterday, is Yafa Chase still here? Yesterday, I had a wonderful conversation with Yafa Chase, young rabbi, who was with the Greenspoon Foundation's help, building networks of Chavurot in Western Mass. I'd love to see that idea go national. But I think you need a small community, you need intimate community in order to build outward toward the concentric circles that really become meaningful community.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at a slightly different perspective through the eyes of somebody who is a Jew living in the Jewish state. Mm-hmm. my not having a relationship with you people endangers my very right to exist as a Jewish state. The world recognized the creation of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, as the state of the Jewish people. I have a responsibility to ensuring the continuation of the Jewish people in order to do all those things we spoke about. But I don't believe that in the world of modern nationalism, or even the world of post-nationalism, a people can survive without a state in which they are sovereign. For me to remain a Jewish state is dependent almost entirely on my relationship with world Jewry. I need it desperately. For this, I need the Jew in the diaspora to understand the Jewish people. Who teaches the Jewish people that? Who teaches that concept of our being a family, of our being a people? Almost no one that I know. It's extremely difficult. How can they? I mean, if Judaism is a religion, what right do we have to a state? And our continued use of language that strengthens our identity as a religion endangers that continuity. Because I was the international president of Hillel. I know your young people, 4.5 years in that job, which some of them heard me say, I traveled so much, my kids used to call me Avinu Shabashamayim. I meet with young Jews, and over and time again, I hear from American young Jews, what right does a state, does a religion have to have a state? And they're 100% right. And our rabbis undermine it. Number one. Number two, conversion. I am today the Israeli chairman of an organization called Honeymoon Israel, which is an organization that brings intermarried couples to Israel on a birthright-like experience, not in order to convince them to convert, but to say to them, listen, to these non-Jewish partners, you've had the chutzpah to fall in love with a member of my mishpocha. I want to talk to you about how your children remain a member of this mishpocha. I'm not going to talk to you about conversion, because they have no interest in joining another religion. They themselves have just left one. Why would they want another that talks the same language of, or a similar language? But when I talk to them about this family, and you're married to a member of my family, and I want to welcome you, and I want to talk to you about how we together can ensure the health of this family, I get amazing responses from these young people. I'm not a family. I have a real problem. I run around Israel begging Arabs, admit the fact that you're Palestinians. Call yourselves Israeli Palestinians. That will help me get Israeli Jews to recognize that they are Israeli Jews, and that Israel is their nationalism, but their bigger identity, their peoplehood, is the Jewish people. I struggle on behalf of a Palestinian state because I want the Israeli Arab citizen to know that his people have a public space which is theirs, in the same way as American Jews have the relationship to a country where the public space is Jewish. So I'm not talking a language that my grandfather or my great-grandfather spoke. I'm speaking a modern language, a sincere language, which carries with it values, which is value-driven, but says, I cannot do without the collective. And my fear is that in Israel we are teaching our kids that we're a nation, and in America we're teaching our kids that we're a religion, And we have no way of talking to each other. We're a mishpocha. Some of us live in a family home. But we're members of the same mishpocha. Let's talk about a family. And then let's talk about what is the purpose of this family. That's what I'd like to do. It's not what is my personal search. I'm not into a personal search. I'm into how can the Jewish people fulfill its messianic goal of making this a better world? That's what I want, nothing else.
My language for it is it's similar. It's a little bit different, I guess. I talk a lot about us as fellow heirs, as Yorshim. We are all heirs to a vast tradition. We're all heirs to the Jewish past. The question is, what do we decide to do? What do we collectively decide to do with that Yerusha that we've inherited? How much of it do we want to keep? How much do we want to change? How much of it do we want to pass on to new generations? How much of it do we want to leave behind? And so that's also a collective enterprise. You can say it's being mishpacha and having a shared Yerusha are two ways of saying the same thing. I'm only concerned. I'm not arguing the point of
If we were really talking about it, I would demand of you, I would say you get rid of this word conversion.
Get rid of the word conversion.
You can be adopted by a people.
It's very nice, but what are you going to do with the Orthodox, Avram? What are you going to do? You're going to create two Jewish peoples. I could say very well, let's welcome everybody who wants to be Jewish and lives with a Jewish spouse into the Jewish people, and your children of Judaism, your grandchildren of Judaism, and then you have a significant quarter of the Jewish people who will not marry them and not accept them as Jews, and we will have pilug ha'am in a way that's precisely something I want to avoid. So I have to, in some ways, backtrack on the kind of openness that I would like to share with you, because I think that will utterly divide the people.
The language of the word conversion.
Well, then we're talking about an English word. So giyur is a different word than conversion. That's right.
A sojourner. Somebody who's come to live with us.
I say the same thing when people want to talk. I say the same thing when people want to talk to me about God. I say, let's talk about Yud Hey Vav Hey rather than the word God in English. So let's talk about giyur. Giyur means something. It has to gur ba'aretz azot, right? It means something about where you live and who you're a part of. But I don't think you can simply do away with the process of giyur altogether and expect not to have an utter division between the Orthodox community and the rest of us.
I suggest that we decide that intermarriage does not necessarily have to be similar.
Yes, but you can't decide that for all those couples. You can't decide that for them. You can decide that theoretically,
But then it's his decision,
but a significant majority of the intermarried couples in America do not identify with the Jewish people. I'm very happy to welcome and open both doors to all the couples who want to be Jewish, who want to raise Jewish children in a mixed marriage household. Vakasha. But the majority of intermarrying Jews do not want to do that, and
we've told them that intermarriage is assimilation.
No, because the Jewish spouse in those marriages is thoroughly assimilated and disinterested, and that happens. That is part of the natural process that's going on in this country because we are very American, because America is very welcoming to white-skinned Jews, because we are farther and farther away from the immigrant memory. That's going to happen, probably to a majority of American Jews. And I think we have to work with those people who want to be Jewish and want to continue, create a vibrant Jewish life. But I think we have to admit that the numbers are going to be smaller.
So I want to be sure that we have a little bit of time for some comments and questions from the room, so I want to open up in a minute. I can't resist, though, Avraham, a little bit of comic relief. You're reminding me of a conversation I had with a young person a couple of years ago. You know, I've been leading teen trips to Israel since 1978, most summers. And so a couple of years ago, I was having a conversation with a group of Bronfman fellows, alumni, and I said, you guys know that there's a lot of hand-wringing going on about whether you really still feel yourselves as part of the Jewish people, whether you feel that you are part of the Jewish family and your sense of connection to Israel is that of a familial connection. and one of the young guys in the room looked at me and he said, Rabbi Sharon, don't worry, I definitely think of Israel as part of my family. I feel about Israel the way I feel about my uncle's second wife. I'm not sure what to do with her exactly, but I know she's part of my family. So, I mean, it's both funny and sad and poignant. You know, some of this is also the way families are changing and how people are thinking about what it means to be connected to a family. So the issues are huge.
We are surrounded with our uncle's second wives.
Yeah.
I find them in the Orthodox community. So my uncle is his second wife. I'm having a hard time getting on with them. Yeah. I find them in the right in Israel. Mm-hmm. Yep. I have very serious problems. They are my uncle's second wife. Yeah. We are going to have to develop a Boston college for getting on with your uncle's second wives, because the Jewish family is packed with them. Yes. We're going to have to work. It's not going to be easy. We're going to have to work hard at it. It's going to demand a lot from all of us.
The problem is the uncle's first wife is still around.
Possibly.
I'm with you. That's a good project. Okay, let's take a little bit of time if there's anyone who wants to share. It can be a question or a comment, but just keep it brief.
So I spent about 40 years in Green Bay, Wisconsin, one synagogue, and there was an interesting trend. We would get people who were not marrying Jews who said they wanted to convert. And we were constantly having classes for them, and some of them stuck and became members of our synagogue without any marriage, involved children. Well, they might have raised their children Jewishly. And so after hearing both of you talk, I'm beginning to say, well, maybe we should start proselytizing.
Yes. I believe in it. I believe in it. Some of the best, most serious rabbinical students I've had the privilege to teach in the last 17 years here have been Jews by choice. And I look around, many of them converting not because they're marrying Jews, but as a result of personal search. And I look around and I say, if there are so many Jews who are not interested in this Yerusha, maybe we should find some new Yoshim. And I'm all for welcoming them. I'm just working with one of our students now, who himself is a Ger Tzedek, to create a serious adult summer camp program for people interested in conversion or recently converted, to have a summer of deep immersion in Jewish life and Jewish learning and so on. I think there are lots of people out there. Alex Schindler, the head of the Reform Movement, said it a dozen years ago that we should be reaching out to such people, and a couple of dozen years ago, and I'm sorry we haven't. Yes?
I have a question that I have to ask you. You've listed the people you've studied with. You've listed Heschel and Yerushalmi and everyone. For me, there was a name that was desperately missing. And there was a name that was desperately missing, who has been a major influence on my life. And that was Mordechai Kaplan.
Yes. Well,
you didn't mention Mordechai Kaplan, who, by the way, was probably the founder of Reconstructionism, this Reconstructionist movement, and undoubtedly the father of peoplehood.
you know, I was president of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College for a number of years.
Oh, that's why I was.
And I had people telling me every day, mention Kaplan more often. Mention Kaplan. Say Kaplan more. Say how many times a week are you saying Judaism is a civilization? Kaplan was
said more than that.
Kaplan was, yes, I know. Kaplan was imposed on me. The truth is, I'll be very honest with you. The teachers I mentioned were all European. They all came with a European accent, and they all came with a European notion of learning, with a lot of existential angst. At Brandeis in the 1950s, you could get the best Middle European education in North America. And I think I must have read Nietzsche in 15 different courses and Sartre in half of those. When I encountered Kaplan, he was too American to really excite me. The American pragmatist, this worldly kind of religion because it's good and healthy for you and it's good for society was just, never spoke to the kind of personal depth or spirituality I was looking for. I think Kaplan was wonderful in asking all the right questions. The language of his answers was always, in some ways, too easy for me and too collectivist for me. And that's where we differ. His was very much an answer. The answer was Jewish peoplehood. Jewish peoplehood, Am Yisrael was at the center, you remember? And then everything else were the outer spokes in the wheel. And for me, the relationship with God is the center. However, I redefine God, and we could spend the rest of the year talking about that. And Jewish peoplehood is part of that, is a means to that. Is there are people we share that quest with, we share that language with, and I love the fact that our people shares that language. But I was really a Heschel student, not a Kaplan student.
Thank you for your frankness.
Yeah.
But you've just proven that I am the only Reconstructionist at this table.
That's absolutely right. No, maybe Sharon is. I will have to ask Sharon. Yes. When Neil Gilman and I used to speak publicly together, I was representing the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and Neil was representing JTS, and he was the Reconstructionist. Yeah.
Michael.
Avraham, we're saying that we're not a religion, and I know that the...
You're going to have to help me. I can't hear you well.
There are many Jews of no religion right now.
Hold on 1 second.
If we say that we're not a religion, and we know that there are many Jews of no religion right now that identify as such, where in your landscape of the Jewish people do you put Messianic Jews?
The question again.
Where in your landscape of Jewish peoplehood do you put Messianic Jews? You mean Messianic?
I am a very, very much of a pluralist.
You
I'm very much
mean
of a
Chabadniks
pluralist.
or Jews for Jesus?
I thought that question would come up when I got your list of suggestions for the discussions.
Yeah.
Because you spoke about Jewish pluralism.
Yeah.
I'm very much a pluralist. For me, pluralism is legitimizing different interpretations of our common memory. Messianic Judaism is living someone else's memory. That, for me, is the distinction. Pluralism, for me, is legitimizing the different interpretations of our common memory. That's why I love Reform Jews and conservative Jews and even Reconstructionist Jews and a heck of a lot of Orthodox Jews. I still regard them as Jewish. Messianic Jews, it's not that I don't regard them as being Jewish, but they are living someone else's memory.
Yeah, so I had a question. Both of you are talking a lot about the people that influenced you. And but you're also talking about decline in numbers, decline in interest. For me, as somebody that devoted my life also to Jewish education and visiting education system all over the US, I see that we don't really have enough good role models and good educators. And I think that some of this decline coming because of that the Jewish community for several generations, decades, didn't invest in education. So this is the reality. So how do we overcome, how do we change it to create a new paradigm, like to create a new renaissance, to make sure that we have more of these people to inspire.
It's a double tragedy. You don't have people and enough capable people educating either to what art is reflecting or to what I'm reflecting. And both should be represented and both should be taught. And we are not training enough people to go into that field. And we are not attracting enough Jews to go into Jewish education as a profession. That is a major problem you have. No culture survives without cultural leaders of the society.
Completely agree. Of course, that's what I've spent most of my life doing. I decided to go into rabbinic education because I felt we needed models and we needed leaders, we needed educators. And so the people we have trained here, I mean, the fact that we have 60-some students in rabbinical school here and number in cantorial school and Jewish education, that's what we do. But it's not enough. I wish it were 10 times as many, no question about it. I don't know if I could handle a rabbinical school of 600, but Ken Yirbu. I want to say something about Jewish institutions. Having worked for both secular universities, including Brandeis, which is a secular university except on fundraising days, and Jewish institutions, I feel that the Jewish people in America has made a terrible mistake in not investing in Jewish institutions. The idea that every Jew who made a few bucks had to have a chair at the university in Jewish studies and have his name on a chair, it made sense to have chairs in Jewish studies at Harvard and Columbia and Brandeis. But the University of Southern Kentucky having a chair in Jewish studies, the University of Northern Virginia having a chair in Jewish studies, that money should have been invested in building institutions for the Jewish community, educational institutions for the Jewish community. Hebrew College has survived, but we know that many of its sister education institutions haven't, and that goes for the denominational seminaries too. Those are what we have for an institutional structure for the furtherance of Jewish life. And I don't mean to be doing Sharon's job for her, but it's terribly important. It's terribly important that those institutions survive and thrive, and they're the ones who are going to train. A number of years ago, people talked about moving the training of Jewish educators to general universities. Have the University of so-and-so have a chair in Jewish education. And I think that's a mistake, because Jewish education has to be taught in a place that's committed to Jewish life and Jewish survival and Jewish creativity, and secular universities by definition can't be committed to that. So I think we need such programs, we need such people, but we also need Jewish institutions in the community to maintain them.
And the state of Israel has a very important role in helping to fund Jewish education throughout the world, but not Jewish education for the diaspora. It has to be Jewish education for Jews irrespective of where they live. You can't talk one kind of language of education in Israel and a different language over here. There can be a common Jewish education of those things which are essential for the continued significant renaissance of one Jewish people. And it has to be done. I told him my father was offered the position to replace Shazar when he became president, of being the head of the Machlaka Lechinuch Yehudi Bagola. He said, I will take the job if you say it's Menahel HaMachlaka Lechinuch Yehudi La'olam HaYehudi, not Lagola. And they wouldn't change it.
And he didn't take it.
He didn't take it.
Wow. Wow. So we have to wrap up in a couple of minutes, and I'm going to give myself the prerogative to ask one final question, and this is in part informed by when I teach rabbinical students homiletics, which I do, the art of giving divrei Torah. One of the things I tell them is you are not allowed to end a drasha without some kind of nechemta, without some note of hope, of genuine hope. And so I actually want to take us there in closing and just ask each of you, so grateful for your honesty and the generosity of your reflections. And obviously there's a lot that's very challenging and difficult in what you've shared and addressed. Is there a note of nechemta that you would offer in closing? A note of something that gives you hope in looking at where we are or where we're heading as a people.
My nechama comes next Monday. Next Monday we have 40 young people showing up at what we call Tashma, which is getting to see the rabbinical school and getting to know about the possibility of becoming a rabbinical student. 40 people. That's a tremendous number. We used to have 10 or 15 showing up for Tashma. Now we have 40 people coming. And these are people who are talking about committing their lives to Jewish leadership and committing their lives to advancing the cause of the Jewish people in America. I tell our students constantly, you are not just American clergymen of the Jewish faith, you are leaders of the Jewish people. And that's very clear. It's very clearly a part of what it means to be a rabbi. You're doing both. You're dealing with faith issues, you're dealing with people's personal struggles and personal growth and personal quest, but you are also the most visible agent of the Jewish people and of the promulgation of Jewish peoplehood for the future of American Jewry. And there are people who are crazy enough to want to give their lives to that. And we have 40 of them coming next week, and I've been here now since 2003, and I've seen 100 and some rabbis graduate. I hear from them out in the field. I hear what they're doing in places like Birmingham, Alabama, and Salem, Oregon, and all kinds of places around the country. And I'm tremendously encouraged by what they offer. They're fighting an uphill battle. They're fighting the same uphill battle I'm fighting, as I say, against certain historical forces which are hard to deny, but they're doing good work. They're putting heart and soul into it, and I'm here to teach them, and I'm here to provide Torah shebichtav, written materials and translations of texts and so on that they will use and teach, and I think that's a future that's if smaller, still very exciting to me.
I can't talk with the same certainty as next Tuesday, but I can tell you that my dream and my hope is that within a decade, the Jewish people win the Nobel Prize for Tikkun Olam. That's my hope.